Hey, hello. Hope you can hear me clearly. It's been a while since I've actually made a live video. I'm not really sure if the audio is working correctly. Sorry for the bad picture quality. I just haven't been able to set up anything. So the title of this video is why and why why we are not living in a simulation. Um, so let's get into it. Okay. So according to a lot of people within the scientific community, they have basically come up with this idea that um, because our computer graphics will eventually become indistinguishable from reality itself, um, it's easy to assume that we will be able to run very realistic simulations. And combined with um, our progress and evolution within regards to artificial intelligence, um, we would be able to actually develop sentient life forms within that artificial simulation, which would ultimately have consciousness. And so these guys, what they've gone ahead and said is that, you know, with enough progress within a civilization's technology, we would eventually have the capability to ultimately develop a simulation. So I'm going to go into why it is that I know that is inaccurate, okay, for a couple reasons. The first reason is that you need infinite processing power and capability with machinery and an energy source that is ultimately not subjected towards entropy. Think about it. If you want to power a simulation that is creating and powering an infinite universe that is potentially eternal, or at least billions, if not trillions of years old, you're talking about processing a nearly infinite amount of variables. Okay, so where would people even first of all get all the power, the processing power, as well as the hardware to be able to sustain that? So processing power, hardware that's not subjected towards entropy, as well as infinite energy. Where are you going to get all of that from? You know, we're talking about infinite processing capability. So when we look at what things like Google Willow have said, yeah, we can see that quantum computers are most certainly leading in that direction. When we look at graphics processing, we also see that our graphics are most certainly leading in that direction as well. Okay. So we're getting closer to solving the computational problem of infinite compute. Well, not infinite compute, but uh, compute that has the power to process an insane amount of seemingly infinite variables. But even as amazing as quantum computers are becoming within regards to the insane amounts of processing capability that they are inheriting, we cannot really compare that amount of variability and processing capability to the amounts of variability and processing capability that would be required to ultimately simulate a seemingly infinite universe. Because, the scale of magnitude of variables within reality is insane. You're talking about you're talking about every single variable that has to do with every single aspect of reality. okay, whether it's biological, whether it's quantum, or whether it's anything that has to do ultimately with matter, okay, and as well as the seemingly infinite amounts of invisible transposing energies that exist within this framework of reality. So even if we did solve the processing problem, there, which I don't believe we would be able to, at least not anytime soon, because as much as they've been able to achieve with quantum computers, right now they're not yet able to stabilize it to allow consistent and accessible computational capability, right? That's not to say that that stabilization won't be accomplished or achieved. Of course, eventually it will. Then the next question becomes, how much computational power does it afford us within relation to how much computational power is required to power a physical reality, which is not just physical, it's interdimensional. Okay, and we know this thanks to quantum physics and the fact that we don't even know the source of gravity, which is why we call these things dark matter, dark energy, because we cannot detect it. We cannot even detect these energies, which are accounting for 80% of 80% of the reason as to why gravity even exists in the first place. Now, in our universe, gravity is required for absolutely every single element within our reality. The formation of stars, the formation of planets, the formation of particles from gases, to our evolution towards biological evolution, and biological components that are required to even hold together and allow living organisms to exist in the first place. Every single aspect of reality that I cannot mention because there's so many require gravity. Okay. If we did not have gravity, we would not have everything else we have within reality. It's a huge core component and ingredient that has been required in order for reality to exist in the way that it does. So not only do we have that aspect, we have an infinite amount of frequencies, bandwidths, and energies, which are all transposed and interconnected and interwoven within each other. Okay. Like gravity, we cannot detect it, but we know that it's interwoven into every single aspect of our physical reality. So there are energies that we cannot detect, and I don't even know if we ever will be able to detect, because the question is, are they even detectable to begin with? Okay. So the one thing we seem to be solving is obviously the computational problem. The other thing that we are so unbelievably far from solving, and as I said, I don't even know if it is possible to solve it, because some of these energies, which reality is dependent upon, uh, the question is, are they even detectable? Right? Because we live in I would say, a consciousness holographic reality. And as I've said, we cannot detect the actual source of gravity. That's why we call it dark matter or dark energy. Okay. And obviously the dark energy is a whole bunch of accounts for a whole bunch of other huge gaps within our mathematical understanding of reality, which we are simply not able to detect or explain the source of so many things within our reality. So if you actually wanted to create a simulated universe, you would need all of those ingredients and building blocks, and you would need to understand them with such unbelievably detailed logic, right? Because you need all of those ingredients, every single one of them, because every single variable is interdependent upon every other variable. Okay, and our reality is made up of different layers of variability. Okay, and every single layer interacts with every other layer of variability. Okay, so we may be able to solve the mathematical problem of being able to compute all those layers of variability. But if we cannot even detect certain layers of variability that exist within our reality, then how could you ever go ahead and create a simulation that could basically create a reality like ours to begin with? You would need to gain an absolute understanding of every single variable within reality. And so, as I explained, even if one day we were able to detect the source of gravity, even if one day we were able to detect the source of gravity, which I don't even know if that is possible, well, it wouldn't just be gravity which we would need to be aware of. It wouldn't just be gravity we would need to be able to detect, because we are learning day by day that reality is compromised of an infinite spectrum of energy. And so I propose this problem that, are we even able to detect um, every energy within that infinite spectrum? Even if we were an advanced civilization of millions of years in the making, would we by then even be able to detect energies that simply may not be detectable at all? Are all of these energies detectable to begin with? Can you detect interdimensional, higher dimensional energies from a third dimensional reality? Yes, maybe some of them, but all of them? So until science can answer that question, they will never ultimately have an absolute knowledge and understanding of every single core building block that exists within the infinite layers of variability that are required in order to understand how to simulate a physical reality to begin with. Because our reality, as we continue to keep proving, is not simply just physical. There are many layers of variability that exist within regards to our reality. Like, for instance, the radio wave was never discovered until it was discovered, you know? But eventually, obviously, people had ultimately discovered radio waves. Um, so, you know, so simulating a universe is, first of all, we don't even understand everything there is to know about the body. No one has actually ever seen DNA because of how small it is. Uh, in fact, the double helix was conceived of before they had even developed any instrumentation to try attempt to prove of whether their concept was real or not. And so eventually crystallography was developed, which ultimately places DNA within a salt mixture, freezes it, and then shoots. I think it's infrared. I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember. It shoots waves off of this extremely tiny stuff. And then it has a machine that is basically used to be able to determine um, the ricocheting of these lasers that are shot towards these extremely tiny, invisibly frozen uh, points of DNA. So the question is that even reliable? What is that machine that it's interpreting the mathematics of interpreting the recoil? I wouldn't say recoil, but ricochet of those lasers. What is being used to interpret that data, and is that model that has been created to interpret that data correct? Okay, because it's quite strange that these guys had actually imagined the shape of the double helix before they supposedly verified it within crystallography based experimentation. Okay. So, but even so, there's so little we know about DNA. You know, when you look at how much they're theoretically assuming DNA holds, it's perplexing, it's astonishing, it's mind blowing. They say that not even all of the quantum computers or supercomputers on this earth would be able to hold as much data as the human body holds. So we simply don't know everything there is to know about DNA. What that percentage is, it probably is minuscule. Obviously, we do know stuff about DNA. They are genetically modifying animals, they're genetically modifying plants. It's not like they know nothing about DNA. They know enough about DNA to be doing what it is that they are doing. You know, for instance, there are genetically modified mice that have been genetically modified to experience an increased accelerated state of autophagy. Autophagy is ultimately when your body uh, produces, I believe it's less insulin, and um, and so they've actually genetically modified mice to actually live 50% longer, 30 to 50% longer, by genetically modifying their genetics to have a increased accelerated state of autophagy. Autophagy is ultimately when your cells recycle and eat themselves, and ultimately recycle energy within the mitochondria and water within the cells, and actually release extremely purified states of water within your cells, and recycle your cells, and actually throw your body into a state of being able to prolong its ability to produce stem cells. So they've actually genetically modified mice to be able to live 30 to 50% longer. Okay. So it's not like we don't know anything about DNA. They know a lot about DNA, but there's still so much we don't know about DNA. Obviously, we're only 6,000 years into our civilization's technological evolution, um, and we have made pretty incredible advances for such a short period of time. And so, you know, the, you know, it's quite crazy where science is at the moment, and the potentiality of where science can lead, because then it begs the question, okay, well, are they going to genetically modify humans in the same way, um, eventually genetically modifying babies? And so there are many ways to introduce genetically changing drugs into a human system, voluntarily or involuntarily. And so there are many ways that people can actually modify human genetics for the good, or for the better or worse. I don't know. That depends on the people who are doing it. So um, so we know quite. So they know quite a bit about genetics. They know quite a bit about DNA, but we don't know everything. If we did know everything, we would have cured cancer by now. We would have been producing and manufacturing miracle drugs that would life extension DNA altering drugs, which I believe certain laboratories are obviously working on right now. Of course, they obviously are, because as I've explained to you, they've already genetically modified mice to to literally live 30 to 50% longer, and potentially even longer in the future. Okay. But as I say, there's still so much we don't know about human DNA. And there's practically nothing we know about gravity. And so human DNA and biology is dependent upon gravity, right? All elements, minerals, atoms, subatomic energy, quantum energies are all in some way or another dependent upon gravity, and maybe gravity is dependent upon these quantum interdimensional energies. And then the real question becomes, are those energies actually able to be detected? Because if we're never able to detect the full spectrum of energy within reality, we will never be able to create a simulation, a simulated reality that mimics this real organic reality we happen to live in. So by the way, there is an app in development. I'm just not going to be speaking about that right now. So just give me a second. So, and also, guys, you have to remember there's a lot of stuff I can't speak about, so I'm not going to speak about it. Give me a second. So, yeah, okay, maybe you're able to solve a computational problem, and maybe your computational solution requires less energy. Okay. But I mean, you still, no matter how much of the energy crisis your computational solution solves, you're still going to require infinite energy. Okay, number one. Number two, the people that are conducting the simulation would, it depends on the elapsed time taking place within a simulation, meaning 1,000 years within a simulation, maybe 10 years outside of the simulation. Okay, because the elapsed time is different, but the elapsed time is dependent upon your processing capability. Like, it's all good and well thinking you can simulate potentially infinite variables of 10,000 years within 10 years, but just because you're stretching 10 years into 10,000 years doesn't mean that you are avoiding the computation that has to take place for every single moment and millisecond of a millisecond, millimoments of a millisecond. Okay, because every single frame within reality would have to be processed and rendered, and maybe you have smart rendering capability, but even if you didn't, even if you were rendering stuff that that people were conscious of, even if you were only like, okay, so for instance, in a video game, your video game only renders what the video game camera has in view and has been programmed to render outside of that view. So not everything is being rendered by your CPU and GPU that is in the game. It's only what's in front of the screen. And even, we couldn't really totally apply that principle to, because, okay, it's one thing crunching numbers and producing calculations, but rendering is a whole nother aspect. Okay, like, it's one thing doing calculations, but actually rendering graphics, because remember, if you're simulating a universe, each conscious individual, they are their own camera, and whatever they are perceiving are the graphics that they are rendering. But because they live in a mass multiplayer MMO universe, every single animal, every single organism, every single being that basically has consciousness would also be simultaneously rendering what's in their field of vision and their field of focus. So now you don't only have one camera to render, you've got however many billions of cameras to render just on one planet, just on one planet that has life alone. Okay. And then not only are you going to have to render all of these billions of consciousness cameras, let's call them conscious cameras, because your consciousness is what's rendering reality. Then you'd have to synchronize all of those cameras' mathematics and processing, even though they're individually rendering different aspects of reality. You would need to synchronize the back-end mathematics connected to the front-end rendering of each of these billions of cameras. And I'm just speaking about one planet here. And then you'd need to synchronize all of those mathematics and rendering. Okay. And then you'd have to have back-end mathematics that are constantly computing the infinite variables that exist within this infinite simulated universe, because you can't just render a camera on one conscious individual when that conscious individual's reality is completely, totally dependent upon gravity and every single other force within the physical universe and the multidimensional, interdimensional nature of that universe. And that goes back to the infinite layers of variability that are all computational layers that all are dependent upon each other and ultimately create one unified computational framework. Okay. So as much as you can divide computation by allowing rendering to take place in each individual's field of focus, you're still going to have to render every single conscious being's conscious camera, let's call it that, as well as the back-end infinite mathematics, because each individual's consciousness, while you're looking at air, you're looking at oxygen, you're looking at another individual's biology, you're looking at light, you're subjected towards gravity. That air, oxygen, and light, as well as the universal cosmology, is all dependent upon gravity and the multiple infinite energetic forces that we are aware of and unaware of, and maybe potentially, very well possibly, will never be able to become aware of. So the layers of complexity are infinite. The layers of processing computational capability required to do this is infinite. Okay. So I'm so sorry about your husband, Robin. I hope you're okay. So the layers of computational capability and complexity are infinite. Okay, so the real question is, how far will quantum computers advance? Just give me a second. I'm busy programming while I'm talking to you. Because just take a second to actually think about what I've just explained to you. Yes, Google Willow has been able to solve a mathematical problem that would have taken, I believe, the strongest supercomputer 10 septillion years to solve. Sure, cool. That's one mathematical issue and one mathematical problem. But in a simulated universe, you're speaking about, as I've explained to you, the amount of data in each individual's DNA, we would not even be able to store on every single computer on this planet at all. We wouldn't even come close to being able to store the data that is supposedly stored within one individual's DNA. So you're not only having to solve the processing problem, you're having to solve a data storage problem. And you're not only having to solve the data storage problem, you're having to solve a hardware problem of your hardware being subjected towards heat damage, heat death, and ultimately entropy. Because server sensors need to replace their hard drives. The Their hard drives are not eternal, they're not immortal. Our hard drives, in the scope of the age of the supposed Earth and universe, are like the lifespan of a bee. So you're having to solve an entropy problem. You're having to solve a storage problem. Yeah, sure, you may be able to be solving quantum computational issues and leading towards solving the stability of allowing those quantum computational processes to occur. But you have to now solve a data storage problem. And in order to solve this particular data storage problem, you need to solve the hardware life cycle and lifespan problem. So, you know, uh, so these people would go ahead and tell you. And also remember, each individual has consciousness, and within that consciousness, you have imagination. And within that imagination, you have all of these energies, you know, with inside of your body. These are quantum interdimensional energies because everything has a quantum nature within reality, including yourself. And I would go further to even say, including your DNA, because you have to remember we experience reality in a real-time, linear, time-based framework, meaning we move forward in time. And in each moment we move forward in time, there is a new, unique, infinite configuration of material, subatomic, and quantum energy configurations taking place. So every single moment has a complete and totally unique computational frame and framework. Every single moment in reality is an infinite mathematical unique configuration and output of that unique mathematical configuration. So imagine the amounts of processing required just to process one single frozen moment in reality across an infinite universe with infinite variables within potentially infinite dimensions. So we would need to understand those infinite dimensions. And we would not only need to understand those infinite dimensions, we would need to understand, because all these dimensions are superimposed within one unified field, we would need to understand how every single infinite layer of dimensionality affects our physical reality and simultaneously coexist within all of these fields of reality within one unified field of reality. So just take a second to think about how unbelievably complex that is to even discover, to understand, to process, to store the data of our acquired and evolved, gained understanding. So we are potentially millions of years as a civilization from ever being able to come close to doing that. And the question I keep coming back to is, are we even able to, from a third dimensional reality, even with our evolved technological instrumentation that may begin to help us detect some of these currently undetectable energies, is it actually at all possible to even detect the full scope of these interdimensional energies? It's very possibly not possible at all to detect the full scope of these interdimensional, higher dimensional transposed energies. So that's a huge barrier, you know. So you can solve the computational problem, and then maybe eventually they solve the hardware problem and the storage problem and the entropy problem, you know, and then the consciousness problem. Those are huge problems to solve. They're not small problems, they're huge problems to solve. You're talking about solving infinite computational capability. You're talking about solving infinite energy production. And then you're talking about infinite storage capability. And then you're talking about uh, 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 um, basically solving the entropy problem of that hardware. Because the simulation is now going to simulate a universe that's billions of years old. Okay. So even if there's time elapsed within that simulation, okay, even if there's elapsed time within that simulation, meaning 10,000 years has passed in the simulation as 10 years have passed outside of the simulation, you still need to be, you still need to process 10,000 years of moments, 10,000 years worth of moments of infinite, and in each moment is a slice of infinite mathematical, potentially infinite mathematical configuration. Okay, so wrap your head around that. We are not even close to doing that. And is it even possible to do that? We don't even know if that's possible to do that. It's more than likely impossible to do that, because I keep coming back to what I'm saying to you. Is it possible to detect the full scope of interdimensional energy that is transposed with it, and affects our physical reality? Because if you cannot find the ingredients that exist at the top of the food chain, you are never going to have the puzzle pieces required in order to create such a unbelievably complex simulation. You won't be able to do it. You simply will not have the knowledge or the ability to detect the information you need to detect in order to even be able to acquire that knowledge in the first place. So, are you living in a simulation? No, you're not living in a simulation. Until someone can give you that answer, it is absolutely ridiculous and preposterous to assume that you are living in a simulation. Because to accept that notion is to accept the notion that every single bandwidth and realm of reality is detectable by humans, civilizations, technological enhancements and improvements, even millions of years into the future. If a civilization is even able to last millions of years into the future, we don't even know if that's possible. The civilization would first have to be able to not destroy itself within 10,000 years of a civilization existing, within 100,000 years of a civilization existing, within 1 million years of a civilization existing. And then the other barrier is ethics. So, is it ethical to go ahead and try simulate a universe? No, it's not ethical. It's not at all ethical. Will human intellect and intelligence and compassion and empathy continue to evolve as the lifespan of a civilization continues to evolve? Because if we do keep evolving consciously, technologically, we must assume that we are evolving empathetically and ethically. And so, with those ethical improvements and evolutions that take place, we would hope that a organized civilization and society would prohibit um, anyone's ability to create a simulation. But knowing how humans are and knowing how greedy and stupid and bureaucratic they are, they're going to look at it from a perspective of discovery and understanding. And they're going to say, well, let's go attempt to all fund a technological effort of creating a simulation and ultimately disregard the ethics within regards to doing that. It is completely, totally not ethical attempting to create consciousness beings in a universe that is subjected towards biological constructs, virtual biological constructs that are subjected towards a state of haptic feedback that allows pain receptivity, death, and entropy, and war, and every single other bad variable that can take place. within a reality of free will based consciousness beings. That is not ethical at all. That's pretty evil, actually, if you're smart enough to look at it from that perspective, smart and ethical enough to look at it from that perspective. It's evil, you know. But even having said that, as I've explained, we would need to solve every single secret of the universe before we could create a perfect simulation of the universe. And there's two ways to look at that. They may run simulations in order to figure out, they may run adaptive machine learning, artificial intelligence based simulations that ultimately create evolving and mutable sandboxes that can ultimately run simulations in order to figure out the perfect simulation that can actually allow that reality to exist. But even mathematically speaking, if they were to run progressive, mutable, evolving simulations in one sandbox framework that is constantly running different mathematical simulations to create the perfect outcome, and eventually accidentally they're like, potentially, oh, we created a universe. It's like, is that even possible? Because base reality, which is the organic real reality, has, as I explained to you, and I'll say it over and over again, we have interdimensional aspects of this reality which are more than likely and forever will be undetectable and unknowable. And so, if they're undetectable, unknowable, and exist within base reality, then how could a experimental based self-learning simulation create energies and dimensions that it is simply unable to create? Because those dimensions and energies exist outside of physical matter. They exist within physical matter, but outside of physical matter, and 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 to the point that they will never be detectable energies. Because it's like, yo, okay, can the guy in GTA figure out that he was coded, that he exists in a video game? Can he figure that out? Can the guy in GTA, which is basically a combination of ones and zeros and electrical transmission within computer chips, processing the ones and zeros, can that dude, and can in that video game reality, can it, which is ultimately the display of pixels on a screen, can within that very limited reality exist interdimensional organic frequencies and energies? No. How is that possible? I don't want to say no, because that gets into a whole bunch of other framework, because robotics is going to evolve, and the crazy thing about comic books is comic books are obviously science fiction, and the thing about science fiction is it's so close to reality. It's Science fiction is so close to reality. If you read these comics, they're speaking about multiverses. I'm not saying multiverses exist. I personally don't subscribe to the multiverse theory for very exact and particular reasons, but they speak about interdimensions, interdimensional cosmic beings, all of this very interesting stuff. And I'm not saying it's got a one-to-one accuracy of reality. And they speak about AI and stuff, and interdimensional AI. Because once AI is able to, like, for instance, so you have a soul, right? I'm a firm believer that we have souls. I've proved it to myself that I have a soul through my own consciousness exploration and research-based exploration, and the empirical evidence I've been able to acquire. I know we have a soul. Okay, so I'm a firm believer in afterlife. No scientist can tell me that an afterlife does not exist. In fact, a lot of scientists are starting to lean towards the reality that consciousness is not dependent upon a physical body, since we have still to this day been unable to explain the true originating force of consciousness. We know that a human brain is required in order to sustain consciousness within a third dimensional reality within regards to a human body, but we still have not ultimately explore the true nature and scope of consciousness itself to begin with. And I'm a firm believer that outside of physical time-based reality exists consciousness-based reality, which also simultaneously exists within our third dimensional real-time linear frame reality. But I know for a fact that infinite time exists within our linear time. I don't want to call it third dimensional, but but let's just call it third dimensional. I mean, yes, let's call it. I don't want to call it like I don't have the concepts to explain what a lot of this stuff because you know we don't really know much about it's. I don't have the words to explain some of these concepts, but let me just try explain it. Um, but outside of time exists a infinite state of, I don't even want to call it time, but let's just call it time. And so the past, present, and future simultaneously exist right now in the present. And they're simultaneously occurring right now. Okay. Which is crazy to wrap your head around. But this explains how precognition exists. Okay. And I will create some videos down the line reporting my own personal experiences and my own understanding of humans' precognitive capability. And I have learned some crazy stuff based on the fact that I myself have been experiencing precognition and through my own experiences have been attempting to explain and understand it. And in my precognitive experiences, I've experienced time in a way that I've never experienced time before. And I've come to know that basically time um, is crazy, dude. Like right now, simultaneously, you are simultaneously existing in the future and you're simultaneously conscious in the future. Okay. And your body now, as well as your consciousness, is simultaneously linked towards your body in the future and simultaneously linked towards your consciousness and body in the past. And your past self is affecting its past self, affecting its present self, affecting its future self, and your present self is affecting your past self and affecting your future self, and your future self is affecting your present self because your consciousness is shared between all these versions of yourself because your consciousness exists within and outside of time. Okay, so your biology actually your eye now, your biological eye is quantumly connected to your biological eye in the future. Wrap your head around that. And quantumly connected to your biological eye in the past, which means that our biology and DNA has quantum properties that experience things like entanglement and quantum tunneling, which we know these are not just theoretical concepts, these are quantum fact-based realities. So your biology, not only is your consciousness um, quantum, but so is your biology, which is mind blowing. So now take into consideration what I'm saying and how many more layers of variability that adds into reality. Reality is not just physical reality. Reality is a conscious reality. Reality is not just a linear framework. It's a framework that exists outside of time. It's a framework that exists beyond time while simultaneously existing within time. These layers of complexity are astonishingly vast and, quite frankly, infinite. So we won't ever be able to create that in a simulation. We won't. We won't. Because I've told you very real constraints that prevent us from being able to do that. The one is a knowledge-based constraint, where we live in a realm where we don't even know if it's factually possible to understand every layer of this reality, or even instrumentally, technologically detect every layer of this reality. So that poses a very real impossibility. Okay, so not only would you have to understand every single layer of reality, do you understand the complexity I'm describing? The complexity I'm describing is infinitely complex. It's infinite complexity. So you're not only having to solve a computational problem, you're not only having to solve an infinite power-based problem, you're not having to solve a hardware entropy-based problem. Now you're having to solve a knowledge problem and a complexity issue. So the real question is, how long will it take humans to understand every single thing there is to understand about reality within this third dimension and every single other infinite dimension that may exist, and how those dimensions simultaneously coexist and affect and depend on each other? Okay, so the real question is, how long will it take a civilization to know absolutely everything there is to know about a reality that exists with infinite complexity? How long would it take a civilization to uncover every single variable that would happen to exist with an infinitely complex reality? And I'm not just speaking about the third dimensional reality. I'm speaking about an infinite dimensional reality. Okay, how long would it take humans, if it is even possible? Because as I keep telling you over and over again, why are we assuming that it is completely, totally possible to detect every single dimension and energy that comes along with that dimension, that simultaneously coexists with our third dimension, and our third dimension depends upon? Because you have to solve that problem. You cannot create a simulation unless that creates this amazing organic infinite reality we have, unless you have solved every single point of this infinitely complex understanding. You would have to understand every single realm, every single dimension, every single variable, as well as every single variable within this third dimensional reality, every single variable within every spectrum and dimension of reality. Then you'd have to understand the infinite ways that every single one of these layers of variability basically coexist and within the interdependent and codependent nature of reality. You'd have to solve every single problem. You'd have to know every single thing about reality in this life and the next. So I'm further showing you that, oh wow, we've got amazing graphics. Cool. Wow, these graphics are so real. Okay. Oh wow, we have unbelievable processing capability. Ooh. Cool. Great. You've got an awesome video game at most. But have you solved the infinite energy problem? Have you solved the infinite, I'm going to call it the forever hardware problem, infinite hardware problem? And how big would your computer be, first of all? Okay, this is a whole nother thing. Oh yes, reality is becoming computer graphics is becoming indistinguishable from reality. Cool, dude. Awesome, bro. how big is your quantum computer going to be to be able to run and process all of this? Of course, the more as the civilization evolves, the smaller our and less expensive our energetically and computationally expensive our technology becomes. Okay, so our chips keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller until it's like, okay, we cannot actually produce any smaller chips in this. We need a new technology that is not subjected towards heat. Okay, because if you like if you're pumping too much electricity through these chips, they eventually melt. They start melting. So you need to solve a heat problem. Okay. Yeah, the heat problem can involve us running these computers in space. Okay. But then you need to solve a storage problem because we can only make storage so small. Every single qubit so small. So the question is, how big if humanity solved all of these impossible problems I've told you they need to solve. Okay. And as I explained to you, one of the ways that they're going to try to solve these problems is they're going to use um, quantum computers to run infinite simulations to try to solve these secrets of the universe. So they may not have all of the answers to create a perfect simulation from start, but they may have a certain mutable, evolving sandbox that they can create that will run simulations in order to figure out a lot of these mathematical problems in solving these secrets of the universe's composition. Okay, how long will that take? How long will it take AI to run infinite, fucking like billions and billions and trillions of simulations in order for it to find out what is required in order to create the building blocks of reality? Okay, then the question is, how big does that computer need to be? How small can we make that computer? As civilization evolves, as technology evolves, how small will that computer become? Where are we going to store all of this? We have a silver shortage. Good news about silver is it's recyclable. Okay, um, but we have a silver shortage problem, and right now our chips, our batteries, even some wiring is dependent upon silver. Okay. And so what they've done is they've basically looked at uh, where we're heading with AI, how much computers and chips and batteries we will need with AI. And yes, it's the silver is recyclable, but what happens when you have no what happens when you have no more silver to recycle because it's all in use? Okay. And then the rate at which you can recycle becomes slower because now you have to wait for silver to no longer be in use because the hardware is becoming ineffective and now giving you a chance to recycle that silver. Maybe there's a potentiality that our mining leads us to finding more silver, and maybe there's a potentiality that we know that our new technology no longer depends upon silver. But whatever that new technology may depend upon, while we live on an earth that has ultimately limited resources. And maybe in order to solve those problems, we would have to basically start figuring out how to mine minerals on other planets, which is also extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. So, so even if you could create a computer that was big enough and powerful enough, the real question is, would all the minerals, aka silver on the planet, be enough to run this computer that's now running an infinite universal simulation? And remember, I've just introduced another realm of variability where I explained to you is that the past, present, and future are interconnected. So not only is the past, present, and future interconnected, but so is this interdimensional variable framework. And so what you end up literally getting is an interdimensional matrix where you're getting cross-sectioning dimensions with cross-sectioning time. And so your computer somehow has to be able to not only process um, stuff in the present of this present state of the simulation, it needs to actually be able to process, because remember that present state of the simulation is dependent upon processing with the past states of that simulation. And now you're talking about billions, if not millions of years. Okay, so do you understand how much more complexity I'm adding to this? I'm adding fucking this is why I say infinite layers of complexity and computational capability. Yes, you may be able to solve finite computational problems, but I'm not speaking about finite computational problems. I'm speaking about infinite computational problems. Okay, so now you need infinite computational capability. That's a given, unless they come up with smart and clever ways to create snapshots of past mathematical configurations within the past of the simulation. So a billion years into the back, we have snapshots of every single moment. And every single moment has its own seemingly infinite cross-section mathematical outputs and frozen frame in time. And remember, every single moment affects every single moment in the future. Every single moment in the future affects moments in the past. They are simultaneously coexisting. So your machine now is not only having to solve computational, like a video game only crunches problems in the present. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I suppose in the future, because physics-based engines run animations, which are time-based animations. And so those time-based animations are basically dependent upon the past and the future. Regardless of that, where are you going to store all of that data? Because you'll have to store if your simulated universe's age is, let's say, 16 billion years old, that means you have 16 billion years, okay, of moments, of fractions of fractions of fractions of fractions of milliseconds. And remember, each frozen moment is a huge mathematical configuration, a huge amount of data, massive. So now you need to store 16 billion years of information within an infinite universe-based simulation you created. And then you don't only need to, then your machine, because then your machine needs to be smart enough to take 16 billion years of information and uh, and basically have it affect the current moments, the current present state of the simulation. Then that present state of the simulation simultaneously coexist with the with the potentially infinite states of the simulation, the future. So do you realize? I'm sorry to say, we don't. What would your computer need to be the size of a planet? Or unless we became so advanced we could figure out how to store data in the same way that the human body stores data. If we evolve in that perspective, yeah, they're going to get closer to solving the data problem. But even if you took every single being and life form on this planet and we just looked at the data that all of their DNA stores, I don't think that is nearly going to even become close enough to be able to hold all of the data that an infinite universe would have to create. Because now I'm actually giving you another problem. Because remember, as I've explained to you, we don't even have enough space on Earth. We don't have enough resources or minerals for all of our quantum computers on Earth in terms of storage would not be able to store the amount of information one human's body's collection of DNA is able to store. So just to be able to currently now store the vast amount of information within one human body, all of our quantum computers, minerals, and resources would not be able to account for that storage capability. So yes, we may be able to become as smart as a human body and being able to store information and data. But now, okay, yeah, you've solved a huge a data storage issue. Amazing. You still need to solve the computational issue. But as I've explained, if you have billions of years of snapshots of information, data, and DNA, when I tell you that one single moment within of time within that simulation is basically got infinite data and infinite variability, it does. Because think about every mineral, every resource, every living being, every DNA, every point of DNA that compounds the amount of data you need to store like crazy, like you cannot believe, compounds it beyond your comprehension. So even if we were able to become as smart as human biology in order to store information, do you understand the regressive loop that's being created here? Oh, we figured out how to store data as intelligently as a human body. Excellent, cool. Now you need to figure out how to store Earth, which has billions of life forms on it, and all of them have their own unique data configurations, which is unique in every single moment. Because you're not just going to take one snapshot of DNA, you're going to have to take snapshots of DNAs of billions of years. That data is insane. I cannot even tell you how much that data is. No scientist can tell you how much data that is. They cannot tell you how much data that is, bro. They cannot tell you how much storage you'd need to store that. Nobody can. It's an impossible equation. It's an infinitely impossible equation. So how far are we from being able to do that? I don't know, maybe millions of years. But as I've explained to you, even if we evolved that much, what if there are certain aspects of reality that are simply unknowable and undetectable? And our reality, of course, relies upon those unknown variables. Then you'll never be able to create a simulated universe like the one you exist in today. And even if, and then there's the ethical problem and the evolution of the civilization. If civilization evolves to become more violent, we destroy ourselves. If civilization evolves to become more empathetic and more ethical, we don't destroy ourselves. And that's the only way, I suppose, civilization can evolve into millions of years. Well, either by becoming more tyrannical or becoming more ethical. And so, if civilization evolved into the ethical route and framework, would humans be ethical enough to prohibit anyone from being able to create something like this? But as I said, considering the greedy, bureaucratic nature of human beings, we'll see. I highly doubt it. I highly doubt that they're not going to be like, oh, well, this seems great. Let's invest a whole bunch of government money into creating simulations in order to help us figure out the true nature of reality. I mean, look at CERN, for instance, right? CERN was a collection of multiple different governments around the world who created this certain way of trying to detect certain aspects and the nature of reality. So, as you can see, the bureaucratic nature of reality has led to us to creating potentially dangerous scientific projects with very minimal oversight. Because how do you comprehensively give oversight of over a technology and realm of exploration that is yet to be discovered or yet to be fully known or comprehended? You're stepping into new territories, and new territories require new legislations. And if they don't require new legislations, then they at least require which I'm sure they have, a very smart ethical framework that basically takes into consideration multiple potential variables that may happen to exist or newly be discovered, which basically puts soft blockers in terms of legislation on regards to what is able to be done with technology. But as you can see with artificial intelligence, They're still in the early stages of being able to actually even formalize that technology. And so what they've done is they've basically removed any soft blockers from prohibiting the evolution of this artificial intelligence arms race, which is currently taking place from every power structure that happens to exist on Earth right now, because it is a race of technological innovation. Okay, so the legislation is a very gray area and it's very messy. So the guardrails are, I don't want to say practically non-existent because I haven't done enough research into what legislative guardrails currently exist right now, but from what I can tell, they're practically non-existent because of the argument that newly formulated technology becomes harder to regulate, because you need to regulate an innovation as soon as an innovation takes place. And in order to regulate an innovation, you first need to understand not only the innovation itself, but the full scope of the innovation's uh, uh, effect on our entire ecosystem of civilization, environmental factors, as well as societal factors that may potentially negatively and adversely affect us into the future. So, if we've learned anything, high speed innovation is proving to be very difficult for these people to even understand how to regulate in the first place, uh, in a way that still allows and inspires evolution to take place. But as you know, governments have many legislative guardrails put in place, like the fact that in some states in America you are not allowed to legally collect rainwater, which is if you obviously uh, find yourself subjected towards federal jurisdiction as a legal citizen or legal person. So there are guardrails, of course, that exist that prevent individuals, I would say, from developing power. Like, for instance, you couldn't just go develop a weapon, you know, without some sort of legislative prohibition or oversight. That is prohibited. That is prohibitator. And somewhat rightfully so, I guess. Uh, we can't have some guy developing fucking crazy ass weaponry without some sort of regulatory oversight. So, although they have an amendment that protects their right to own weapons, it doesn't actually tell it. It doesn't it although they're able to own weapons, the government decides what weapons they're actually able to own, which is kind of a contradiction if you think about it, because the whole reason um, that the Constitution allows, let's call it US citizens, to own weapons was because of the civil war they had back in the day and the citizens' ability to actually fight a defective government. Right? That's the whole reason Americans are allowed to own arms. Okay. But the irony and the ridiculousness of it is the government is the one determining what arms you're able to own. So the government may have like super fucking crazy ass weaponry, and you got your, I don't know, your semi automatic rifle or whatever they allow you to own. And it because the whole reason we're able to own is because we must have a right to be able to defend and protect ourselves from a tyrannical, evil government, if that is the case. But if your tyrannical, evil government has fucking crazy weaponry that you don't even understand, eventually it comes to a certain point where your right to own arms is ultimately irrelevant. Maybe useful to some degree, but hey, if they have sonic weapons that can completely, totally disable an entire country, then your weapons are ultimately rendered completely useless and ineffective. So it comes back to regulatory and legislative oversights within regards to the control and suppression of certain technological innovations and evolution. I'm sure with the military has some sort of framework that they will allow or won't allow. But within regards to AI, it is it's mostly unregulated and unlegislated. So in terms of simulations, it will probably follow the same pattern. But I'm very confident in saying that we do not live in a simulation. It's preposterous to believe that we do. People are just going ahead and telling you that we more than likely exist in a simulation because the rate of our technological evolution leads us towards assuming that computer graphics will ultimately uh, become so indistinguishable from reality that we won't be able to tell the difference. Yeah, dude. Yeah, dude. Yeah, bro. With very limited rendering. Okay, go back in this conversation and listen again to what I said about the infinite based mathematical processing capability that would be required, the infinite forever hardware problem that would need to be solved, the potential infinite resource problem that would have to be solved, as well as the what infinite storage problem that would have to be solved, um, infinite processing, infinite energy, infinite storage, infinite hardware, and how big, and the space problem. How big is your computer going to be in order to run something like that? And then the other problem I didn't mention, which I'm going to mention now, is okay, in the future, do they start genetically modifying humans the same way they've genetically modified mice today to help us live longer? Do we eventually lead towards solving the entropy and aging problem? It's not a far cry to imagine since human lifespans have, I would say, somewhat dramatically increased over the last couple of 100 years. Humans do live a lot longer thanks to medical science and I suppose sanitation and water and food, and the far more abundant nature of civilization and society as it stands right now. Humans do live longer. The real question is, because we do know biotech is a huge emerging industry, multi-billion, if not multi-trillion dollar industry in the making. And you know, uh, biotech is a huge field. It's a massive one. And the reason I'm going to biotech now, if it seems like I'm going all over the place, is because if you're running an infinite simulation that takes place over an elapsed time of billions of years, which would have to take place in the real time of millions of years, or billions of years, depending upon how much the elapsed time the computational processing capability affords them. Meaning, uh, this simulation, is it simulating stuff in real time, or is it actually simulating stuff slower than real time? So an hour outside of the simulation is 2 hours in the simulation, or is an hour in the simulation, uh, an hour outside of the simulation 10 hours in the simulation? So what is the elapsed time? Okay, and that is dependent upon our processing capability. Is it taking 10 years to render uh, 1 year within a simulation, you know? So that means that the people outside of the simulation, facilitating the simulation, have they solved the aging problem? Are these human beings that are living past 100 years, past 200 years, past 1,000 years? Have they solved the entropy problem? Is it even possible to solve the entropy problem? If it's not possible to solve the entropy problem, then is that program being handed down by generation to generation? So the new generations that are staying alive basically keep conducting that simulation based program. There's a lot of factors you need to take into consideration. to allow something like this to even occur and happen in the first place. But my major conclusion is we are not in a simulation, and the people that are telling you that we are in a simulation have not explained to you the infinite complex nature of what would be required in order to create a simulation like this in the first place. That is my major conclusion. And let's go through some of these comments. Hey Jesse, Robin, very good to hear from you. Haven't heard from you in a long time. Very sorry about your husband. That's terrible. How did he pass? If you don't mind me asking. Actually, sorry, that's a bad question to ask. I'm very sorry about that. I hope you're okay. And I would go ahead and say that he is alive and well. So not all is lost. 16 years. Wow. Very sorry about that. Luis, very good to hear from you. I hope you're keeping well. Spiritual warrior. Why is your video black and white? I have no idea. Uh, I see you asking questions about an application. There is an application currently in development now. It's quite amazing and extremely advanced. Can't speak much on that right now. Okay, Robin, very good to hear from you. Very sorry to hear about what happened. Amazing to hear from you. Hope you keep well. I would say basically that is the end of my video as to why I believe we are not in a simulation, why I know we're not in a simulation. Because that gave me huge nightmares. We're not in a simulation. It is so mathematically impossible right now to even consider that we are in a in a simulation. And I've explained every single reason as to why that is the case from my perspective, research, and understanding. So thank you guys. Keep well.